The bank called our house at 8:14 on a Tuesday morning while my husband was in the shower, humming like a man with absolutely nothing to hide, and when I answered, the woman on the line paused for half a second before asking, "Mr. Holloway, can you verify the last 4 digits connected to the transfer of $380,000 into the Chandler account?" I still remember staring at the ceramic coffee mug in my hand because my first thought wasn't that he was cheating on me. It was that we didn't even have $380,000 left anymore. Not after he spent 11 months convincing me his real estate firm was struggling. Not after I canceled another IVF appointment because he said we needed to be smarter financially. And definitely not after I sold my grandmother's Cartier bracelet in February so we could supposedly cover payroll taxes. The woman kept talking while my husband's shower ran upstairs, steam curling under the bathroom door like nothing in our marriage was already burning alive, and somewhere between the words suspicious transfer and beneficiary account, I realized two things at once. My husband had been lying to me for a very long time, and whoever Rachel Chandler was, she had just become the most expensive mistake of his life. My husband Evan had a talent for making dishonesty sound responsible, which was probably why I believed him for so long. By March 2025, he had me clipping grocery coupons, canceling weekend trips, and apologizing whenever I ordered takeout because his commercial property business was supposedly bleeding cash. He'd sit across from me at our kitchen island in those perfectly pressed blue dress shirts, laptop open beside spreadsheets I never questioned, explaining why we needed to postpone having children for just another year. Meanwhile, I was picking up freelance design contracts at midnight to help cover expenses he claimed were temporary. The humiliation didn't happen all at once. It happened quietly. It was listening to my husband praise financial discipline, while I removed fertility medications from an online cart because they cost too much. It was watching him kiss my forehead after I sold heirloom jewelry to help us stabilize. It was realizing the man I defended to my own worried mother had already built an entirely separate life behind my back. After the bank call ended, I didn't confront him. I poured his coffee exactly the way he liked it, 2 sugars and oat milk, and sat there listening to him complain about money while knowing he had hidden $380,000 in another woman's account. I started collecting evidence the same afternoon the bank called, not because I had some dramatic revenge plan already forming in my head, but because something inside me understood that men like Evan only admitted to whatever you could physically place in front of them. Emotion never worked on people who survived through manipulation. Documentation did. At 11:42 a.m., after he left for a property meeting in Bellevue, I opened the drawer in his office where he kept business overflow paperwork, the same drawer he once laughed about because he claimed it gave him anxiety to organize it. What I found instead was organization so meticulous it made my stomach hurt. Wire transfer confirmations, escrow summaries, LLC registration packets, printed account statements from a Chase private banking division I had never heard him mention before. Every document carried tiny pieces of the same name, Rachel Chandler, sometimes listed as a consultant, sometimes as a vendor, once, unbelievably, as a strategic acquisition advisor. I took photographs of everything with my phone, careful to keep the pages in order, then emailed them to a brand new ProtonMail account I created under my college nickname. By 2 in the afternoon, I knew the transfer stretched back at least 16 months. Smaller amounts at first. $7,000, $12,000, $28,000. Then suddenly 6 figures moving through shell LLCs connected to 2 commercial renovation projects Evan had repeatedly told me were underperforming. The worst part was how patient the deception had been. He hadn't recklessly stolen money. He had slowly rewritten our reality around the theft. Every sacrifice he convinced me to make suddenly looked engineered. The postponed IVF treatments. The canceled anniversary trip to Charleston in October 2024. The constant speeches about budgeting. Even the fight we had when I asked why he suddenly moved our joint savings into separate business accounts. I remember he stood in the kitchen that night with this exhausted expression, like I was burdening him by asking basic questions about our own finances. "You don't understand commercial cash flow," he told me then. I think that sentence replayed in my head 20 times while I sat on the floor of his office surrounded by proof that he had weaponized my trust like an asset. At 4:06 p.m., I called the fertility clinic he insisted we couldn't afford anymore. The receptionist recognized my voice immediately, because I had canceled so many appointments over the past year that she started sounding sympathetic every time we spoke. I asked her to email me the invoices from every postponed procedure since January 2024. 20 minutes later, I had 37 pages documenting exactly what I gave up while Evan financed another woman's life. That night he came home carrying sushi from my favorite restaurant, which almost made me laugh because suddenly I could see the guilt management hidden inside his kindness. He kissed my temple while I plated dinner and casually mentioned he might need to move money around again, because one of his development partners was panicking about liquidity. I looked directly at him and asked, "Is everything okay financially?" He didn't even hesitate. "We're tight right now," he said, loosening his tie dramatically like the performance physically exhausted him. "Honestly, babe, I've been carrying this whole company on my back." Then his phone lit up beside his plate. He flipped it face down so quickly most people would have missed it, but I still saw the preview banner before the screen disappeared. "Rachel. Miss you already." Evan continued eating like nothing happened while something cold settled permanently inside me. I realized then that this wasn't just an affair. It was a long-term financial betrayal executed carefully enough that he genuinely believed I would never untangle it. Unfortunately for him, he forgot I used to audit grant allocations for a nonprofit before freelancing, which meant I had spent years tracing missing money professionally. And unlike his mistress, unlike his business partners, unlike everyone else who only saw the polished version of him, I knew exactly how Evan behaved when he was scared. 3 days after the bank call, I hired a forensic accountant without telling anyone, including my best friend Naomi, because the moment other people become emotionally involved, they start pushing you toward confrontation before you're strategically ready. The accountant's name was Daniel Mercer, a quiet man in his early 50s who operated out of a glass office overlooking Elliott Bay, and spoke in the calm tone of someone who had spent decades watching wealthy people destroy themselves through greed. I brought him printed screenshots, transfer confirmations, LLC filings, and a yellow legal pad filled with dates I had reconstructed from Evan's calendar history. Daniel barely reacted while reviewing everything, which somehow terrified me more than outrage would have. Finally, he slid one paper back toward me and tapped the bottom wire notation. "These aren't gifts," he said. "He's laundering marital assets through vendor inflation." I remember staring at him because the word laundering sounded too criminal, too cinematic, too distant from the man who still reminded me to lock my car doors at night. Daniel explained it slowly. Evan was creating fake operational expenses through shell entities tied to renovation contracts, then redirecting overpayments into accounts connected to Rachel Chandler. The money only appeared legitimate because it moved through real projects first. "This is sophisticated," he added quietly. "Not impulsive." That sentence stayed with me all week. Not impulsive, meaning every dinner where Evan discussed budget stress had happened while he actively rerouted our future into another woman's life. Daniel advised me not to confront him yet, especially because several transfers appeared recent enough to create legal exposure if moved incorrectly. Instead, he recommended I secure copies of our joint tax returns, property deeds, insurance policies, and trust documents before Evan sensed anything had changed. That same evening, I drove to our downtown condo parking garage and sat inside my car for nearly 20 minutes rehearsing my face before going upstairs. Evan was already home, standing barefoot in the kitchen, opening a bottle of Cabernet while jazz played softly through the ceiling speakers. The scene looked so normal it almost made me question my own evidence. "You okay?" he asked immediately, studying me too closely. For one terrifying second I thought he somehow knew. Then he smiled faintly. "You've been quiet lately." I walked over, kissed him lightly, and told him freelance work had me stressed. The lie came out smoother than I expected. That was the first moment I understood something dangerous about betrayal. Once trust collapses, deception stops feeling immoral and starts feeling necessary. Around midnight, after he fell asleep beside me, I used his thumbprint against his phone while he was unconscious. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped it onto the hardwood floor. Evan never deleted anything completely. He only archived conversations because he once bragged that deleting messages looked suspicious during divorces. The hidden folder contained exactly 8 months of texts with Rachel, hotel confirmations, apartment photos, screenshots of wire transfers, complaints about me. That part hurt more than the affair itself. Not because he criticized me, but because of how carefully he reduced me into an obstacle. She still thinks cash flow is the issue, one message said from February. Another read. Once the Mercer development closes, I can move the remaining funds and finally untangle things cleanly. Untangle things. As if our marriage were a logistical inconvenience instead of a human life. Then I found the message that changed everything. Rachel had sent him a photograph of a diamond bracelet on April 17th with the caption, "Worth every penny." Attached underneath was the receipt. $38,400. Cartier. Paid through one of the same LLC accounts funding the hidden transfers. I stared at the image for so long my vision blurred. Because 4 days earlier I had cried alone in our bathroom while telling my mother we still couldn't afford another IVF cycle. Evan slept peacefully beside me the entire time. One arm stretched across my side of the bed like he still believed proximity counted as loyalty. I carefully photographed every message, every receipt, every confirmation number, then placed his phone back onto the charger exactly how I found it. Afterward, I went into the guest bathroom, locked the door and finally let myself cry for precisely 4 minutes before washing my face, fixing my makeup, and opening my attorney's email titled, Emergency Asset Protection Consultation. By the second week of April, my entire life had split into 2 separate performances. The version Evan saw where I remained patient, trusting, slightly distracted by freelance deadlines, and the version quietly unfolding underneath it, where attorneys, accountants, and financial investigators were building a timeline detailed enough to dismantle everything he thought he controlled. My attorney, Vanessa Ruiz, operated with the terrifying precision of someone who never needed to raise her voice to ruin a person's life. During our first in-person meeting on April 11th, she spread copies of Evan's transfers across a walnut conference table and asked only one question before agreeing to take the case. "Do you want emotional revenge?" she said calmly. "Or permanent leverage?" I answered immediately. "Leverage." Vanessa nodded once like I had passed some invisible test. Over the next 10 days, we quietly secured copies of every shared financial record connected to the marriage. Retirement accounts, business ownership structures, escrow histories, property tax filings, insurance beneficiaries. What shocked even Vanessa was discovering Evan had recently attempted to modify the beneficiary structure on a life insurance policy tied to his company without notifying me. The request had been delayed because one signature line was incomplete. Rachel Chandler's name appeared in draft paperwork dated March 28. 23 days earlier, Evan had taken me to dinner for our 6th wedding anniversary and toasted to building a future together. That realization stopped hurting after a while. Eventually betrayal becomes administrative. On April 19th, everything escalated unexpectedly when Rachel herself called our house. Evan was in San Diego for a commercial real estate conference, or at least that's what he told me before leaving with a navy garment bag and suddenly renewed interest in the gym. I answered on the 3rd ring. There was silence for 2 seconds before a woman asked cautiously, "Is Evan there?" Her voice sounded younger than I expected. Nervous even. I told her he was unavailable and asked who was calling. Another pause. "Tell him Rachel called." Then she hung up immediately. Most wives would have confronted the mistress emotionally after that. I drove to Bellevue instead. Daniel had traced several transfers into a luxury apartment building where Rachel leased a penthouse unit under one of the Shell LLCs. The building concierge wouldn't release tenant information, but he didn't need to. I sat in my car across the street for almost an hour watching residents move through the lobby, while rain streaked across my windshield in thin silver lines. At 6:17 p.m., Rachel appeared carrying 2 shopping bags and laughing into her phone. She looked polished in the exact way women look when someone else funds their piece. Camel coat, blowout curls, cream heels carefully protected from puddles. She paused outside the entrance while searching her purse for keys, and for one strange moment I didn't hate her. I just studied her. Because the truth was, women like Rachel rarely think they're participating in theft. They convince themselves they're participating in love. The real danger had always been Evan. That became even clearer 2 days later when Vanessa called me at 7:03 a.m. sounding sharper than usual. Overnight, Evan had initiated another transfer attempt. $92,000 routed through a contractor account connected to the Mercer development project. The transaction triggered an internal fraud review because of already flagged irregularities from the original bank call. He's nervous, Vanessa said immediately. People move money when they sense instability. That morning, while Evan texted me photos from his supposed conference breakfast buffet, my legal team filed emergency financial preservation motions with King County Superior Court. By noon, subpoenas were already moving toward 2 banks connected to the shell entities. By evening, Daniel confirmed several accounts were temporarily frozen pending investigation. Evan still had no idea. At 9:40 that night, he FaceTimed me from his hotel room smiling casually while loosening his tie. "Miss you," he said softly. Behind him, reflected faintly in the dark television screen across the room, I saw the outline of a woman walking past the minibar. Rachel froze the second she noticed the phone angled toward the reflection. Evan never saw her, but I did. And instead of reacting emotionally, I smiled back and told him to enjoy the rest of his trip, because by then the most important thing in the room wasn't his affair anymore. It was timing. Evan found out everything was collapsing on a Thursday at 2:13 p.m., while sitting inside a lender meeting for the Mercer Development Project, which I know because his first 11 missed calls hit my phone within 4 minutes of the bank freezing the remaining flagged accounts. I was downtown at Vanessa's office signing final divorce filings when his name started flashing repeatedly across my screen like an alarm. By the 6th call, Vanessa glanced over the rim of her glasses and said, "He knows." I silenced the phone and finished signing anyway. There's something strangely peaceful about putting your full legal name onto documents that end a lie. 20 minutes later, Evan finally left a voicemail. He sounded nothing like the composed man who spent 2 years lecturing me about financial discipline. His breathing was uneven. Panicked. "Claire, pick up the phone," he snapped first, then immediately softened his tone. "There's some kind of misunderstanding with the bank, and I need to know if anyone's contacted you." Misunderstanding. Even then, he still believed language could manage reality. I didn't call back. Instead, I drove home slowly through Seattle traffic while rain blurred neon reflections across the windshield. And for the first time in weeks, I felt completely calm. When I walked into the condo at 5:46 p.m., Evan was already there pacing the living room in the same gray suit he wore to investor meetings. His tie was gone. His sleeves were rolled unevenly. Papers covered the dining table beside his open laptop. He turned the second he heard my keys. "What did you do?" he demanded. But underneath the anger was fear so obvious it almost embarrassed him. I set my purse down carefully and asked if he wanted coffee. That unsettled him more than yelling would have. "Claire," he said sharply, "stop acting like you don't know what's happening." Then he started talking too fast. The bank froze multiple accounts. A compliance review had triggered. One of his investors received notice of irregular vendor payments. Someone filed preservation motions against several business entities. Every sentence confirmed our case was working exactly as intended. I waited until he finished spiraling before calmly asking one question. "Who's Rachel Chandler?" The silence afterward felt physical. Evan stared at me for several seconds, calculating. You could actually watch him deciding which version of the truth might still save him. "It's not what you think," he said finally, which would have been insulting if it weren't so predictable. I walked to the dining table, opened a manila folder Vanessa prepared for me, and spread photographs across the wood surface one by one. Wire transfers, jewelry receipts, hotel confirmations, screenshots of archived messages, the unsigned insurance beneficiary draft. Evan's face changed gradually with every page until he stopped looking like a husband and started looking like a defendant. "You went through my phone?" he whispered, as though that were the betrayal worth discussing. I almost laughed. Instead, I handed him the final document. A forensic accounting summary tracing approximately $380,000 in diverted marital assets through Shell LLCs connected to Rachel. Daniel's report was 46 pages long. Evan flipped through it silently while color drained from his face. "Claire," he said after a long pause, suddenly gentler, "I can explain this. But explanations only matter before evidence exists." I told him the accounts were under review, our attorneys already filed, and his investors would likely distance themselves once discovery began. Then I mentioned something Vanessa specifically advised me to save for last. If investigators concluded any transferred funds impacted tax reporting or fiduciary disclosures tied to development financing, his professional licensing exposure could become severe. That finally broke him. Evan sat down slowly at the dining table and covered his mouth with one hand, staring at the paperwork like he no longer recognized his own life. And in that moment, after months of manipulation, humiliation, lies, fake budget talks, canceled IVF appointments, and stolen trust, the strange thing was this. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt free. Because the most dangerous part of betrayal is how long it convinces you that you're powerless. And the most satisfying part of revenge is realizing you never were. 3 months later, Evan settled before Discovery went public. His investors exited quietly, 2 development deals collapsed, and Rachel moved out of the Bellevue penthouse less than 2 weeks after the asset investigation expanded. I heard that part through mutual acquaintances, though by then I had stopped tracking either of them because revenge loses its flavor once peace finally arrives. The divorce agreement restored the majority of the diverted assets, including the retirement funds he thought I'd never trace, and on August 14, 2025, I walked back into the fertility clinic carrying a folder with my own name alone on the financial authorization forms. The receptionist smiled when she recognized me. "You look lighter," she said softly. She was right. Not happier exactly. Stronger. There's a difference. Sometimes people think power looks loud, dramatic, explosive. But the most dangerous women are usually the quiet ones sitting across the table, already holding every receipt, while everyone else mistakes their silence for weakness. Evan underestimated me because I loved him. That was his first mistake. The second was assuming love made me blind. If you've ever stayed silent while people underestimated you, subscribe. Because some stories deserve to be heard till the very end.